Hi, I'm Riley. And yes, my parents handed my sister my entire $80,000 inheritance and called it a paperwork mix-up. Ashley smiled like she'd won the lottery while I stood there holding an empty envelope with my name on it. But what they didn't know was that their precious golden child had been living way beyond her means, and their house was already 3 months behind on payments. What happened next didn't just teach them about consequences. It taught them that the daughter they overlooked had been paying attention to everything. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The phone call came on a Tuesday morning while I was getting ready for my shift at the veterinary clinic. Mom's voice had that artificial cheerfulness she used when delivering bad news, like when she told me they couldn't afford my college tuition, but somehow found money for Ashley's spring break trip. To Europe the same week? Riley, honey, there's been a small mix-up with Grandma Rose's inheritance. The lawyer's office made an error with the paperwork, and well, Ashley already deposited the check. We're working on getting it sorted out, but it might take some time. I sat down hard on my futon, still holding my coffee mug. What kind of mix-up, Mom? Well, you know how these legal things get complicated. The important thing is that it's family money, and we'll figure it out together. That was Mom's way of saying Ashley had spent it already, and they weren't planning to do anything about it. I'd learned to read between the lines of their excuses years ago, back when Ashley crashed Dad's truck, and somehow I was the one who lost driving privileges for not reminding her to check the mirrors. How much time are we talking about? I asked, though I already knew the answer would be vague enough to mean never. These things take time, sweetheart. Ashley's looking into it, though. She feels terrible about the whole thing. Ashley feeling terrible was about as likely as snow in July, but I let Mom finish her script. She had it rehearsed perfectly, probably practiced it in front of Dad while they convinced themselves this was just another little family hiccup that would blow over if they ignored it long enough. After hanging up, I sat in my small Capitol Hill apartment, looking around at my secondhand furniture and the stack of veterinary school loan statements on my kitchen counter. $80,000 was supposed to be my fresh start, my chance to maybe buy a small house or at least pay down enough debt to breathe easier. Grandma Rose had specifically told me during her last Christmas that she wanted me to have something of my own, something that couldn't be taken away. Apparently, she'd underestimated my family's creativity. I called the lawyer's office myself that afternoon. Mr. Peterson sounded genuinely confused when I explained what my mother had told me. Miss Thompson, I'm afraid there wasn't any mix-up on our end. The inheritance was distributed according to your grandmother's will, which clearly designated specific amounts for each beneficiary. Your sister received her portion, and you received yours. But I never got a check, I said, my stomach dropping. The check was issued to the address we had on file and was cashed 3 weeks ago. If you didn't receive it, that's a matter for the bank and possibly the police. The address on file was my parents' house, the same house where I hadn't lived for 5 years, but where my mail still occasionally ended up because I'd never bothered to change everything over. The same house where Ashley had been staying on and off whenever her latest relationship imploded, or she needed someone to subsidize her lifestyle. I drove to the bank that afternoon with a cold determination settling in my chest. The teller, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, pulled up the account information and confirmed what I already suspected. The check had been deposited through mobile deposit, and the signature didn't look anything like mine. It looked exactly like Ashley's. Flowing script, the same handwriting that had forged permission slips throughout high school while I was too honest to even consider such a thing. I'd like to file a fraud report, I told her. She nodded sympathetically and handed me a stack of paperwork. You'll need to contact the police as well. Bank fraud is a felony, especially at this amount. Walking back to my car, I felt something shift inside me. For 26 years, I'd been the understanding one, the one who didn't make waves, who accepted whatever scraps of attention or resources were left after Ashley got her fill. I'd worked 3 jobs to put myself through college while she partied her way through a degree our parents paid for. I'd sent birthday cards and Christmas gifts while she forgot my existence until she needed something. I'd bitten my tongue through countless dinners where her latest drama took center stage while my accomplishments were acknowledged with distracted nods. But this was different. This wasn't about fairness or family dynamics or who got more attention at Thanksgiving. This was theft, plain and simple, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't going to let it slide. The police report took 2 hours to file. Officer Martinez was thorough and professional, explaining that cases like this were more common than people thought, especially within families. She warned me that pursuing charges could get messy, that family members often pressured victims to drop complaints to avoid scandal. "Just be prepared for pushback," she said as she handed me the case number. Money has a way of showing people's true colors. I already knew my family's true colors. I'd been studying them my whole life. That evening, I called my parents' house. Dad answered, and his voice immediately took on that careful tone they used when they knew they were in the wrong but hoped I wouldn't push it. "Riley, your mother told me you spoke to the lawyer. I'm sure we can work this out without involving outsiders." "Dad, someone forged my signature and stole $80,000. That's not a family disagreement, that's a crime." "Now, let's not be dramatic. Ashley made a mistake, but she's family. We don't call the police on family. Apparently, we do steal from family, though." The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if he'd hung up. Finally, he sighed, and I could hear Mom's voice in the background, though I couldn't make out the words. "Why don't you come over for dinner tomorrow night? We'll sit down and discuss this like adults." I almost laughed. They wanted to discuss my stolen inheritance over pot roast and mashed potatoes. Like this was some minor scheduling conflict that could be resolved with Mom's cooking and Dad's reasonable voice. "Is Ashley going to be there?" "She's staying here for a few days while she gets back on her feet." Of course she was. Ashley was always getting back on her feet, usually with other people's money supporting her while she figured things out. I wondered what crisis had brought her home this time, what bridge she'd burned or bill she couldn't pay. "I'll be there." "At 6, I said. After hanging up, I sat at my kitchen table and did something I'd never done before. I Googled my parents' address and pulled up the property records for their house. What I found made my stolen inheritance seem like small change in comparison. The Victorian house in the Highlands where I'd grown up, the house they'd owned outright for 15 years, was currently 3 months behind on mortgage payments. They'd taken out a second mortgage 2 years ago for $200,000. And from the payment history I could access through public records, they'd been struggling to keep up ever since. I stared at the screen, pieces clicking into place. Ashley's new BMW, the kitchen renovation last year, the cruise they'd taken for their anniversary, Dad's early retirement. All of it funded by borrowing against the house, turning their biggest asset into a monthly payment they apparently couldn't afford. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. My phone buzzed with a text from Casey, my best friend since college. "How did the bank thing go?" I called her instead of texting back. Casey was the only person who knew the whole story, the only one who'd watched my family dynamics play out over the years without making excuses for them. "They remortgaged the house," I told her without preamble. "What? Who?" "My parents. They took out a huge loan against the house and now they're behind on payments. That's probably why they're not rushing to fix the inheritance thing. They needed Ashley to cash that check." Casey was quiet for a moment. "Riley, that's seriously messed up, even for your family. I'm having dinner with them tomorrow night. Ashley's going to be there. Do you want me to come with you? Moral support?" I considered it, but this felt like something I needed to handle alone. I'd spent so many years having other people fight my battles or make excuses for why I couldn't stand up for myself. This time, I wanted to walk in there with my eyes wide open and my spine straight. I think I need to do this myself, but thank you. Just promise me you won't let them guilt you into dropping this. What they did was wrong, and you know it. After we hung up, I spent the rest of the evening researching foreclosure laws in Colorado. I learned about redemption periods and sheriff's sales, about how properties got listed and what happened to families who couldn't catch up on their payments. I read about investors who specialized in buying distressed properties and how the whole process worked from start to finish. By the time I went to bed, I had a plan forming in my mind. It wasn't revenge exactly. It was something more strategic, more fitting. If my family thought they could use me as their personal ATM while leaving me out of their financial decisions, they were about to learn that I'd been paying attention to a lot more than they realized. The next morning, I called in sick to work and drove to the county courthouse. The foreclosure filing was a matter of public record, and seeing it in black and white made everything real in a way that online research hadn't. The house would go to sheriff's sale in 6 weeks unless they caught up on payments. The total amount owed was just over $40,000, including penalties and fees. $40,000. Exactly half of what they'd let Ashley steal. From me. I made copies of everything and drove home to get ready for dinner, my heart beating steady and determined in my chest. Tonight, I was going to find out exactly how far my family was willing to push me. And then I was going to show them what happened when the quiet one finally decided to stop being quiet. The Victorian house looked exactly the same as always when I pulled into the driveway that evening. The same blue paint with white trim. The same rose bushes Mom tended religiously. The same front porch where Dad liked to read his paper on Sunday mornings. It was hard to believe that this picture of suburban stability was built on a foundation of debt and poor decisions. Ashley's BMW was parked in the spot where I used to park when I lived here, gleaming silver under the streetlights. The car was less than 6 months old, and I wondered if my inheritance money had gone toward the down payment or just the first few lease payments. Mom opened the door before I could knock, wrapping me in one of her enthusiastic hugs that always felt like they were trying to smooth over whatever awkwardness was about to follow. "Riley, sweetheart, you look thin. Are you eating enough?" It was her standard opening, the same thing she'd said every time I came home since college. Behind her, I could see Dad setting the table with their good china, the set they only used for special occasions. Apparently, discussing my stolen inheritance qualified as special. Ashley appeared in the kitchen doorway, and for a moment, we just looked at each other. She was wearing a dress I didn't recognize, something that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget, and her hair was freshly highlighted. She looked like success, like someone whose biggest worry was which restaurant to try for brunch on Sunday. "Hey, Riley," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "I'm glad you could make it." I nodded but didn't return the greeting. Instead, I followed Mom into the living room where Dad was fussing with wine glasses and pretending this was just another family dinner. "How's work?" he asked, settling into his recliner with the careful movements of someone trying to project normalcy. "Busy. We've been seeing a lot of cases where people can't afford their pets' medical bills anymore. Economy's been tough on everyone." It wasn't subtle, but subtlety had never worked with my family. They preferred to pretend problems didn't exist until they became impossible to ignore. Mom called us to dinner a few minutes later, and we settled, around the familiar table where I'd eaten thousands of meals growing up. The pot roast smelled exactly like I remembered, and for a moment, I felt a pang of nostalgia for the times when family dinners were simple and uncomplicated. "So, Dad," said after we'd all filled our plates, "your mother and I have been thinking about this inheritance situation." "You mean the theft situation," I corrected. Ashley's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "Riley, that's a little dramatic. It was an honest mistake." I looked at her directly for the first time since arriving. Forging someone's signature is an honest mistake? The color drained from her face, but she recovered quickly. I don't know what you're talking about. The check came to the house with my name on it. Actually, it came with my name on it. You just decided to cash it anyway. Mom jumped in with her peacekeeping voice. Girls, let's not fight. We're family, and family works things out together. Family doesn't steal from each other, I said calmly. Family doesn't forge signatures and commit felonies. Felonies? Dad's voice rose an octave. Riley, you're blowing this way out of proportion. I reached into my purse and pulled out the copies I'd made at the courthouse, laying them on the table next to the mashed potatoes. Am I? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you needed my inheritance money to keep your house out of foreclosure. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. Ashley stared at the papers like they might catch fire, while Mom's face went through several expressions before settling on defensive anger. How dare you investigate our private financial business, she said, her voice shaking. How dare you steal my inheritance to pay for your private financial problems, I shot back. Dad cleared his throat, trying to regain control of the conversation. Riley, you're our daughter. What's ours is yours, and what's yours is ours. That's how families work. Really? Because I don't remember getting a vote on the second mortgage. I don't remember being consulted when you decided to risk the house to fund Ashley's lifestyle. But somehow, when it comes time to pay the bills, my inheritance becomes community property. Ashley finally found her voice. You've always been jealous of me. This is just another way for you to cause drama and make yourself the victim. I turned to look at her, really look at her, and saw what I'd been missing for years. The desperation behind the designer clothes, the fear underneath the entitled attitude. She wasn't the golden child living a charmed life. She was someone who'd never learned to support herself, who'd bounced from one safety net to another until she'd finally run out of places to land. I'm not jealous, Ashley. I'm disappointed. In all of you. I stood up from the table, leaving my dinner barely touched. You have 6 weeks to figure this out. Either you pay back my inheritance, or the house goes to sheriff's sale. And if it does, I'll be there with my checkbook. The look of horror on their faces told me they finally understood that this wasn't going to blow over like all the other times they'd brushed aside my feelings or needs. This time, there would be consequences, and I was the one who got to decide what they looked like. Walking out of that house, I felt lighter than I had in years. The quiet daughter had finally found her voice, and it turned out she had quite a lot to say. The next morning came with the kind of clarity that only follows a sleepless night spent making life-changing decisions. I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open, coffee growing cold beside me, scrolling through foreclosure auction websites and real estate investment forums. The more I read, the more convinced I became that this wasn't just about getting my money back. This was about teaching my family that actions have consequences, even when those actions involve the daughter they'd always taken for granted. My phone had been buzzing since 7 a.m. with increasingly frantic calls from Mom, Dad, and finally Ashley herself. I let them all go to voicemail. Whatever panic had set in overnight could simmer a little longer while I did my research. After years of being reactive to their chaos, I was finally going to be proactive about my own life. Casey called during my lunch break, her voice tight with concern. Riley, your mom called me 3 times this morning looking for you. She sounds completely unhinged. What happened at dinner last night? I told them the truth about what I knew and what I planned to do about it. Which is what, exactly? You were pretty cryptic when you left for dinner. I explained about the foreclosure filing, about my plan to attend the sheriff's sale, about how their house could become my house if they couldn't get their financial situation sorted out in the next 6 weeks. Casey listened without interrupting, which was one of the reasons I valued her friendship so much. She never jumped to conclusions or tried to talk me out of decisions before understanding them fully. "That's actually brilliant," she said when I finished. "Ruthless, but brilliant. Do you really think you can pull it off?" "I've been reading about it all morning. Foreclosure auctions are cash only, and you have to have your financing lined up in advance. I've got about $30,000 in savings, and I can get pre-approved for a mortgage on the rest. The house is worth at least $350,000, but at a sheriff's sale it'll probably go for much less. What if they somehow come up with the money to stop the foreclosure? Then they pay back what they owe the bank, and I'm out nothing except the satisfaction of watching them sweat for 6 weeks. Either way, I win." That afternoon, I drove to my credit union and sat down with a loan officer named Ms. Rodriguez. She was a small woman with sharp eyes and an efficient manner that reminded me of my favorite professor from veterinary school. I explained that I was interested in bidding on a foreclosure property and needed to understand my financing options. "Foreclosure auctions can be tricky," she warned. "You need to be prepared to pay cash on the spot, usually within 24 hours. No financing contingencies, no inspections, no backing out if you discover problems later." "I understand the risks. What kind of pre-approval process are we looking at?" She ran my credit score and reviewed my employment history, nodding approvingly, at the steady income from the veterinary clinic and the lack of major debt beyond my student loans. "With your down payment and credit profile, we could pre-approve you for up to $200,000. That gives you flexibility at auction, but remember, you're competing against cash investors who flip houses for a living. This particular property has sentimental value to me," I said carefully. "I'm willing to pay more than an investor might." She studied my face with the practiced eye of someone who'd seen every kind of real estate drama. "Family property? Something like that." Walking out of the credit union with a pre-approval letter in my purse felt like stepping into a different version of my life. For the first time, I wasn't the daughter begging for scraps of attention or understanding. I was someone with options, someone with power, someone who could change the outcome instead of just accepting whatever outcome other people chose for me. My phone rang as I was driving home. Ashley's name flashed on the screen, and after a moment's hesitation, I answered. "Riley, thank God. Mom is having a complete breakdown. She's convinced you're going to somehow steal the house." "I'm not stealing anything. I'm potentially buying it at a legal foreclosure auction with my own money." "You can't be serious about this. It's our childhood home. It's where we grew up, where Mom and Dad plan to retire. It's also the collateral they put up when they decided to live beyond their means. They made their choices, Ashley. Now they get to live with the consequences." "This is insane. You're destroying our family over money." The hypocrisy was so breathtaking it actually made me laugh. "I'm destroying the family? You literally stole my inheritance and committed bank fraud, but I'm the one destroying the family?" That was different. That was a misunderstanding. No, that was a crime. A crime you committed because you knew Mom and Dad needed that money to keep their house. A crime you committed because you figured I'd be too weak to do anything about it. Ashley was quiet for so long I thought she'd hung up. When she finally spoke, her voice was smaller, more uncertain. "What do you want from us, Riley? What would it take for you to drop this whole thing?" "I want my $80,000 back, plus interest, plus compensation for the time I've had to spend dealing with your mess. And I want an apology that actually acknowledges what you did wrong instead of calling it a misunderstanding." "We don't have $80,000. If we had that kind of money lying around, we wouldn't be behind on the mortgage." "Then you'd better figure something out because the clock is ticking." I hung up and immediately called Mr. Peterson, the lawyer who'd handled Grandma Rose's estate. His secretary put me through right away, and his familiar voice was reassuring after a day of difficult conversations. "Miss Thompson, I got your message about the inheritance check. I have to say, I'm very sorry this happened. Your grandmother specifically wanted you to have financial security." I'm wondering about my legal options beyond the criminal charges. Can I sue my family civilly for the theft? Absolutely. You could pursue damages for the principal amount plus interest, legal fees, and potentially punitive damages for the fraudulent conduct. However, if they're already facing foreclosure, a judgment might not be worth much from a collection standpoint. What if I were to acquire the foreclosed property? Would that change anything? He was quiet for a moment, and I could practically hear him thinking through the legal implications. That's an interesting strategy. If you purchased the property at foreclosure, you'd essentially be recovering your losses through asset acquisition rather than cash payment. It's perfectly legal, and frankly, rather clever. Can you recommend someone who specializes in foreclosure law? I want to make sure I understand all the procedures and potential complications. I'll send you some names, but Riley, are you sure about this course of action? Family relationships are hard to repair once they're damaged this severely. I thought about all the family dinners where I'd been an afterthought. All the birthdays where Ashley got elaborate celebrations while I got cards bought at the last minute. All the times I'd been expected to understand and forgive while my feelings were dismissed as oversensitivity. Mr. Peterson, they damaged this relationship when they decided my inheritance was community property. I'm just responding to the situation they created. That evening, I sat in my apartment with a legal pad making lists and timelines. The foreclosure sale was scheduled for 5 weeks from today. I had that long to get my financing completely arranged, to research comparable sales in the neighborhood, and to decide exactly how high I was willing to bid. I also had 5 weeks to watch my family scramble to find a solution they should have. Been working on for months instead of hoping the problem would somehow disappear. Part of me felt guilty about the stress I was causing, but a larger part felt vindicated. For the first time in my life, their poor planning was becoming their emergency instead of mine. Casey came over with Chinese takeout and a bottle of wine, settling into my second-hand armchair with the comfortable familiarity of a friendship built on mutual support rather than obligation. "Okay, I have to ask," she said, opening the wine. "Are you doing this because you actually want the house, or because you want to prove a point?" "Both. I've always loved that house even after I moved out. It's got good bones, and the neighborhood is only going to get more valuable. But honestly, if they'd just acknowledged what Ashley did and worked out a payment plan for my inheritance, I probably wouldn't have looked into their mortgage situation. And now? Now I realize this isn't just about my $80,000. This is about a pattern that's been going on my entire life. They make terrible decisions and expect other people to bail them out. Ashley spends money she doesn't have and expects the family to cover for her. They prioritize her wants over my needs and expect me to be understanding about it." Casey nodded thoughtfully. "You know what I think? I think you're tired of being the responsible one who gets punished for other people's irresponsibility." "Exactly. I worked 3 jobs to pay for college while Ashley partied on their dime. I've been financially independent since I was 18 while she's bounced from one support system to another. I've made careful, responsible choices my entire adult life, and the one time I was supposed to inherit something that would give me a little breathing room, they stole it to bail themselves out of problems I didn't even know existed. So what happens if you actually buy the house? Do you move back in?" I'd been thinking about that question all day. "I don't know yet. Maybe I'll rent it back to them at market rate. Maybe I'll sell it and use the equity to start my own veterinary practice. Maybe I'll just live there and let them figure out where to go next." "That's cold, Riley. I'm impressed." "I'm not trying to be cold. I'm trying to be smart. They taught me that family loyalty only flows in one direction, so I'm applying that lesson." My phone buzzed with another call from Mom, which I ignored. The voicemail she left was barely coherent. Something about family loyalty and Christian forgiveness and how disappointed Grandma Rose would be. It was fascinating how quickly their tune had changed from, "It's just a misunderstanding," to, You're tearing the family apart. The next few days fell into a rhythm. I went to work, fielded increasingly desperate calls from my family, and spent my evenings researching everything I could about foreclosure procedures and property values. I drove by the house twice, noting things I'd never paid attention to as a child. The new roof from 3 years ago, the updated electrical panel, the mature landscaping that added significant value. I also started seeing things differently at work. Dr. Williams, the veterinarian I worked for, mentioned that he was thinking about expanding the practice, but was hesitant to take on more debt. Mrs. Patterson brought in her elderly cat and confided that she was worried about affording his kidney medication on her fixed income. Mr. Singh's dog needed surgery, but he was trying to decide between paying for it and making his car payment. These were the kinds of financial pressures real people dealt with every day, not the kind of manufactured crisis that came from borrowing against your house to fund a lifestyle you couldn't afford, then stealing from your own daughter when the bills came due. On Thursday, exactly 1 week after the disastrous family dinner, Dad showed up at the veterinary clinic during my lunch break. I saw him through the window, pacing in the parking lot like he was working up the courage to come inside. When he finally entered, his face had the gray, strained look of someone who hadn't been sleeping well. "Riley, we need to talk." "We talked last week. I told you what needed to happen. Can we go somewhere private? Please?" I glanced at Dr. Williams, who nodded understanding. "Take your full hour," he said quietly. We walked to a coffee shop 2 blocks away, settling into a corner booth where Dad wrapped his hands around a mug of black coffee like it was an anchor. He looked older than I remembered, more fragile, and for a moment I felt a flicker of the old sympathy that had kept me silent for so many years. "Your mother hasn't slept since Sunday night," he began. "She's convinced you hate us." "I don't hate you. I'm disappointed in you. There's a difference." "Riley, I know we made mistakes. The second mortgage seemed like a good idea at the time. Your mother wanted to renovate the kitchen, and Ashley was going through her divorce and needed help, and my retirement account wasn't performing like we'd hoped. So you decided to gamble with the house. We thought we could handle the payments. We didn't expect my hours to get cut, or for your mother's back surgery to cost so much even with insurance. Dad, I'm not unsympathetic to financial problems. What I can't understand is why you thought it was okay to steal my inheritance to solve problems I didn't know existed." He flinched at the word steal. "Ashley said the check came to the house by mistake. She thought it was hers. Ashley's name wasn't anywhere on that check. My name was printed right on the front, and she forged my signature on the back. That's not a mistake, that's a deliberate crime. She was desperate. The divorce settlement fell through, and she'd already signed the lease on her apartment. So she committed fraud to pay her rent?" Dad's shoulders sagged. "When you put it like that, it sounds so calculated. But you know Ashley. She doesn't think things through. She just reacts. She's 28 years old, Dad. Being impulsive isn't cute anymore. It's criminal." We sat in silence for several minutes. Around us, the coffee shop hummed with normal conversation. People discussing work projects and weekend plans and other mundane topics that seemed impossibly simple compared to the wreckage of my family. "What would it take for you to forgive us?" Dad asked finally. "I need my inheritance back. All of it. And I need Ashley to face consequences for what she did. We can work out a payment plan for the money. Maybe a few thousand a month until it's paid back." "With what money? You're 3 months behind on your mortgage and facing foreclosure in 4 weeks. We're exploring options. Maybe a loan modification or a reverse mortgage." I stared at him across the table, this man who'd taught me to ride a bike and helped me with algebra homework and told me I could be anything I wanted when I grew up. He was still trying to find magical solutions to problems that required hard choices and sacrifice. "Dad, there is no easy fix for this. You borrowed more money than you could afford to pay back. Ashley stole money that wasn't hers. Those are facts, not problems that can be solved with good intentions and wishful thinking. So you're really going to buy our house out from under us? I'm going to bid at a legal foreclosure auction for a property that's going to be sold whether I'm there or not. If you don't want me to buy it, then find a way to catch up on your mortgage payments. He shook his head slowly. $80,000 wouldn't even cover what we owe. We'd need more than that to get current. Then maybe you should have thought about that before you let Ashley cash my check. Walking back to work, I felt the weight of having burned another bridge, but also the strange relief of having spoken the complete truth for once. No sugarcoating, no diplomatic half measures, no protecting other people's feelings at the expense of my own reality. Dr. Williams was between appointments when I returned, and he gestured for me to join him in his office. Everything okay? You look like you've been through a blender. I gave him the abbreviated version of the family drama, watching his expression shift from sympathy to disbelief to something approaching admiration. That's quite a situation, he said when I finished. But you know what? I think you're handling it exactly right. I've seen too many good people get taken advantage of by family members who mistake kindness for weakness. Some days I wonder if I'm being too harsh. Riley, you're one of the most conscientious people I know. If you've reached the point where you're willing to take this kind of action, then I guarantee they pushed you there. Don't let them guilt you into backing down now. His words stayed with me through the rest of the workday and into the evening. By the time I got home, I'd made another decision. I called Brandon Kim, a real estate agent Casey had recommended, and scheduled a meeting for the weekend. If I was going to do this, I was going to do it right. The foreclosure sale was 4 weeks away, and I intended to be ready. Brandon Kim met me at a downtown coffee shop on Saturday morning, arriving with a leather portfolio and the kind of confident handshake that suggested he'd handled complicated real estate situations before. He was younger than I'd expected, probably. Early 30s, with an easy smile that didn't hide his sharp attention to detail as I explained what I was planning. Foreclosure auctions are a whole different animal from regular home sales, he said, pulling out a tablet to show me recent auction results in Denver. The good news is that most retail buyers are scared off by the process, so you're mainly competing against investors and flippers. The bad news is that those investors know exactly what they're doing, and they've got cash ready to deploy. He scrolled through listings, pointing out properties that had sold for significantly less than their market value. This house went for 60% of its appraised value. This one for 75%. But occasionally, you get bidding wars when multiple parties want the same property for different reasons. What kind of different reasons? Location, condition, development potential, sometimes emotional attachment. He gave me a meaningful look. Properties with sentimental value can end up selling for more than they're worth because someone's bidding with their heart instead of their head. I understand the financial risk, but I also understand that if I don't bid, some investor is going to buy it for a fraction of what it's worth and probably flip it within 6 months. Fair point. Let's talk strategy. What's your absolute maximum bid? I'd been running numbers all week, calculating and recalculating based on the house's current condition, the neighborhood market, and what I could realistically afford. 200,000 is my hard limit. The house should appraise for around $350, so even at 200, I'd have decent equity. That's smart thinking. Conservative enough to protect yourself, high enough to discourage most investors. He made some notes on his tablet. I'll research the competition, see who typically shows up at these auctions and what their strategies look like. I'll also pull detailed comparables for the neighborhood so we know exactly what we're dealing with. Can you attend the auction with me? Absolutely. I've represented clients at dozens of these. Having professional representation can actually discourage some bidders who assume you've done more homework than they have. After Brandon left, I spent the afternoon at the public library, diving deeper into property records and foreclosure procedures. The more I learned, the more confident I became that this wasn't just an emotional decision disguised as a financial one. The house really was a solid investment, regardless of my personal history with it. My research was interrupted by a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. Riley? This is Janet Morrison, Ashley's friend from college. I hope you don't mind that I got your number from your mom. I definitely minded, but I was curious about why one of Ashley's friends was calling me. Janet and I had never been close, mainly because she was part of the social circle that treated me like Ashley's weird little sister during the brief periods when I existed in their awareness at all. What can I do for you, Janet? I heard about what's happening with your family, and I wanted to reach out. Ashley is really struggling right now, and I think maybe you don't realize how hard things have been for her. I'm aware that she's been living beyond her means. I'm also aware that she stole my inheritance to fund her lifestyle. She told me about the mix-up with the check. That really does sound like an honest mistake. Janet, did Ashley ask you to call me? There was a pause that answered my question. Before she did. She's just worried about your parents. They're not young anymore, and losing their house would devastate them. Then she should pay back the money she stole so they can catch up on their mortgage. You know she doesn't have that kind of money. Then she shouldn't have spent that kind of money. Riley, I know you and Ashley have always had your differences, but this is bigger than sibling rivalry. This is about your parents' security in their retirement years. The manipulation was so transparent it was almost insulting. Janet, let me be very clear about something. Ashley stole $80,000 from me. That's not sibling rivalry, that's a felony. And my parents allowed it to happen because they needed that money to cover their own financial mistakes. This isn't about family dynamics or personality conflicts. This is about theft and consequences. But buying their house at foreclosure? That seems so extreme. What seems extreme to me is committing bank fraud and then expecting the victim to just let it slide to keep the peace. After I hung up, I realized that Ashley was probably working her way through her entire contact list, looking for someone who could talk me out of my plans. The fact that she'd resorted to calling Janet, who I hadn't spoken to in 3 years, suggested she was getting desperate. My phone rang again an hour later. This time it was my Aunt Patricia, Mom's sister, calling from Phoenix where she'd moved after retiring from teaching. Riley, honey, your mother called me in tears. She says you're trying to take their house. Hi, Aunt Patricia. I'm not trying to take anything. Their house is being foreclosed on because they stopped making mortgage payments. I'm considering bidding at the auction. But sweetheart, that house has been in the family for 20 years. It's where you and Ashley grew up. It's also the collateral they put up when they took out a loan they couldn't afford to pay back. Your mother says this is all over some confusion about an inheritance check. I could hear Mom's version of events filtering through my aunt's words, sanitized and reframed to make me look unreasonable. Aunt Patricia, someone forged my signature and stole $80,000 from me. The police are investigating it as bank fraud. There's no confusion about what happened. Oh, my. Her voice got quieter. Your mother didn't mention police involvement. There's a lot my mother didn't mention, apparently. Riley, I know your family can be complicated, but surely there's a way to work this out without involving law enforcement. I tried working it out. I offered to accept a payment plan if they acknowledged what Ashley did and took responsibility for it. Instead, they've been calling it a misunderstanding and acting like I'm overreacting. What would it take for you to drop the charges and forget about this auction business? My inheritance, returned in full, plus a genuine apology that doesn't include the word misunderstanding. And if they can't come up with that much money right away? Then they'll learn that actions have consequences, which apparently is a lesson they never taught Ashley. Aunt Patricia sighed. You sound so angry, honey. That's not like you. I'm not angry. I'm done. There's a difference. Sunday morning brought an unexpected visitor. I was drinking coffee and reading the real estate section when Ashley's BMW pulled into my apartment complex parking lot. Through my window, I watched her sit in the car for several minutes, apparently gathering courage or rehearsing what she planned to say. When she finally knocked on my door, she looked different than she had at dinner the week before. Less polished, more vulnerable. Her designer clothes couldn't hide the stress lines around her eyes, or the way her hands shook slightly as she waited for me to invite her in. "We need to talk," she said. "I figured that's why you're here." I didn't make it easy for her. No offer of coffee, no invitation to sit down, no small talk to ease the tension. She stood in my living room looking around at my secondhand furniture and modest apartment like she was seeing it for the first time. "I never meant for this to get so out of hand," she began. "What exactly did you mean to happen when you forged my signature and cashed my inheritance check?" "I thought I could replace the money before you noticed. The divorce settlement was supposed to come through, and I was going to pay you back plus interest." "The divorce settlement that fell through?" "Marcus's lawyer found some technicality. The whole thing got delayed indefinitely." "So you gambled with my money on a settlement that might never happen." Ashley sat down uninvited on my couch, and for the first time since this whole mess started, she looked genuinely defeated. "I know how it sounds. I know what I did was wrong. But I was desperate, Riley. I had nowhere else to turn. You could have asked me for help. Would you have given it to me?" The question hung in the air between us. Would I have loaned Ashley $80,000 if she'd asked? Probably not, and we both knew it. Her track record with money was abysmal, and her track record with taking responsibility for her mistakes was even worse. "That's not the point," I said finally. "The point is that you didn't give me the choice. You just took what you wanted and figured you'd deal with the consequences later. I never thought you'd find out this fast. I thought I'd have time to fix it." "So your plan was to commit fraud and hope you didn't get caught?" "My plan was to solve a temporary problem with a temporary solution." "Ashley, there was nothing temporary about what you did. You stole money that belonged to me. Money that Grandma Rose specifically left to me. You violated my trust and committed a felony. There's nothing temporary about any of that." She was crying now, the kind of messy tears that couldn't be dismissed as manipulation. "I've ruined everything, haven't I? The family, my relationship with you, Mom and Dad's house. You made choices. Those choices had consequences. That's how the world works for everyone except you, apparently. What can I do to fix this? Tell me what you want and I'll do it." "I want my $80,000 back." "I don't have $80,000. I spent most of it on the apartment deposit and paying off credit cards and catching up on my car payments." "Then get a job and start paying it back. Riley, be realistic. Even with a good job, it would take me years to save that much money. Then it sounds like you'll be paying me back for years. What about Mom and Dad? They're going to lose their house because of my mistake." "No, they're going to lose their house because they took out a mortgage they couldn't afford and then enabled you to steal from me instead of facing their financial problems honestly." Ashley wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, smearing her makeup. "You're really going to buy the house at auction?" "I'm really going to bid at the auction. Whether I buy it depends on how the bidding goes." "And then what? You'll evict Mom and Dad and move in like nothing happened?" "I haven't decided what I'll do with the house if I buy it, but whatever I decide, it'll be my choice to make, just like it was your choice to steal from me." "This isn't you, Riley. You're not vindictive. You're not cruel." "You're right. I'm not vindictive or cruel, but I'm also not a doormat anymore. I'm done letting this family walk all over me and then act surprised when I finally stand up for myself." Ashley stood up, her composure cracking completely. "I hope you're happy. I hope destroying our family makes you feel better about yourself." "I didn't destroy this family, Ashley. You did that when you decided my inheritance was yours to take. I'm just refusing to pretend it didn't happen. After she left, I sat in my quiet apartment feeling something I hadn't expected. Relief. For years, I'd imagined what it would be like to have an honest conversation with Ashley about our family dynamics, about the way I'd always been the afterthought while she was the center of attention. I'd thought it would feel dramatic, or emotional, or somehow significant. Instead, it just felt like finishing a conversation that should have happened years ago. Ashley was who she'd always been, someone who made impulsive decisions and expected other people to clean up the mess. The only difference was that this time, I wasn't volunteering for cleanup duty. Monday brought another development. Dr. Williams pulled me aside during a quiet moment at the clinic with news that seemed unrelated to my family drama, but somehow felt connected to everything that was happening. I've been thinking about what you mentioned last week, about expanding the practice. I've got an opportunity to buy the building next door and double our space, but I need a business partner who can handle the financial side of things. I don't know anything about business management. But you know animals, you understand the clients, and you've got a level head for practical decisions. Plus, you mentioned you were considering investing in real estate. I've been looking at one specific property. Well, before you commit to that, think about this. Partnership in an established practice with room to grow. The chance to build something instead of just owning something. The timing felt like the universe offering me alternatives, different ways to use my resources and energy. Instead of spending my savings on a house tangled up with family history and resentment, I could invest in a business that would give me independence and professional growth. How much investment would you need from a partner? Around $150,000 for the expansion, equipment, and working capital. In exchange, you'd own 40% of the practice and have a say in all major decisions. Can I think about it? Of course. But Riley, opportunities like this don't come along often, and I think you'd be amazed at what you could accomplish when you're not constantly fighting other people's messes. That evening, I called Brandon Kim to discuss this new variable in my decision-making process. He listened thoughtfully as I explained about the veterinary practice opportunity. It's an interesting choice, he said. Real estate is typically a safer investment with more predictable returns, but a business partnership gives you more control over your success. Plus, there's no emotional baggage attached to the veterinary clinic. The foreclosure auction is still 3 weeks away. I don't have to decide tonight. True, but it might be worth running the numbers on both scenarios. What would your life look like in 5 years if you bought the house versus if you partnered in the practice? It was a good question, one that kept me awake that night thinking about futures I'd never seriously considered before. For years, my planning had been reactive, focused on surviving whatever crisis my family created next. Now I was thinking about what I actually wanted to build, rather than what I felt obligated to fix. The next morning brought a call from Mr. Peterson, the estate lawyer, with an update on the criminal investigation into Ashley's check fraud. The district attorney's office has reviewed the case and they're planning to file charges. Bank fraud. At this dollar amount is a Class 4 felony in Colorado. Your sister is looking at potential jail time and substantial fines. How much jail time? Anywhere from 2 to 6 years, depending on her criminal history and whether she accepts a plea agreement. The weight of that information settled over me like a heavy blanket. Ashley had never been in serious legal trouble before. A few speeding tickets, maybe a minor in possession charge from college, but nothing that would prepare her for the reality of felony charges. What happens next? They'll issue a warrant for her arrest, probably within the week. She'll be booked, arraigned, and then released on bond if she can post it. The whole process could take 6 months to a year to resolve, depending on whether it goes to trial. And the money? Restitution would be part of any plea agreement or conviction. The court would order her to pay you back, though collecting on that judgment could be challenging if she doesn't have assets. After hanging up, I realized I felt no satisfaction at the thought of Ashley facing criminal charges. Just a kind of sad resignation that it had come to this. She'd had multiple opportunities to take responsibility for what she'd done, to work out some kind of payment arrangement, to at least acknowledge that she'd hurt me. Instead, she'd chosen to double down on calling it a misunderstanding and hoping I'd eventually give up and let it slide. My phone rang almost immediately. Mom's number flashed on the screen, and I knew Ashley must have gotten word about the charges being filed. "Riley, please, you have to drop these charges. Ashley could go to prison." Ashley could go to prison because she committed a felony, not because I reported it. She's your sister. How can you do this to family? How could she steal from family? How could you let her? We're trying to fix this. Your father is looking into a home equity loan to pay you back. Mom, you're already in foreclosure. No bank is going to give you a home equity loan when you're 3 months behind on your mortgage. Then what do you want us to do? We can't undo what happened. I want you to stop acting like this is my fault for reporting a crime instead of Ashley's fault for committing one. She made a mistake. She made a choice. And now she gets to live with the consequences of that choice, just like I've had to live with the consequences of trusting my family. The foreclosure auction was 18 days away. The criminal charges would be filed within the week. Dr. Williams needed an answer about the partnership within 10 days. All the pieces were moving toward some kind of resolution, but I still wasn't sure what that resolution would look like. What I did know was that I was done being the family member who absorbed everyone else's poor decisions. For the first time in my adult life, I was making choices based on what was best for me, not what would keep everyone else comfortable. It was terrifying and liberating at the same time. The morning of the foreclosure auction arrived with the kind of crisp October air that made everything feel sharper, more defined. I'd barely slept, not from nerves, but from anticipation. After weeks of preparation and family drama, today would finally provide some resolution one way or another. I dressed carefully in my best business suit, the navy one I'd bought for job, interviews after graduation, and met Brandon Kim at the courthouse steps. "You ready for this?" he asked, adjusting his tie as we watched other potential bidders gathering near the entrance. "As ready as I'll ever be." The crowd was smaller than I'd expected, maybe 20 people total. Brandon pointed out the obvious investors, men in expensive suits with folders full of property information and the casual confidence of people who did this regularly. There were a few couples who looked like regular homebuyers, though Brandon explained they were probably looking for investment properties rather than places to live. "Most retail buyers can't handle the cash requirements," he said quietly. "Everyone here today is prepared to pay immediately upon winning." We found seats in the third row of the courthouse's main hearing room, which had been converted for the VI auction. The auctioneer, a thin man with a surprisingly powerful voice, called the proceedings to order and began reading the legal description of the first property up for bid. My parents' house was the 7th property on the docket. As we waited, I watched the bidding on other homes, trying to understand the rhythm and strategy. Some properties generated intense competition, with bids escalating quickly past reasonable market values. Others barely attracted any interest at all, selling for less than I would have thought possible. "See that guy in the brown jacket?" Brandon whispered, nodding toward a middle-aged man near the front. "He's a local flipper. Very aggressive bidder, but he knows his numbers. If he drops out early, it usually means the property has problems we can't see." When they called the address I'd grown up at, my heart rate picked up despite all my preparation. The auctioneer read the legal description, the outstanding debt amount, and the minimum bid required to satisfy the lien. $43,000, slightly higher than I'd expected due to accumulated fees and penalties. Do I hear 43,000? Several hands went up immediately. The bidding started moving in $1,000 increments, quickly reaching 50,000, then 60. I stayed out of the early rounds, watching to see who my real competition would be. At $75,000, most of the casual bidders dropped out. At $85,000, it was down to 3 serious contenders: myself, the flipper in the brown jacket, and a woman in her 50s who had the focused intensity of someone with a specific plan for the property. 90,000, called the woman. 95, responded the flipper. I raised my hand. 100,000. The auctioneer acknowledged my bid and looked around for counters. The woman shook her head and sat back, apparently having reached her limit. The flipper studied me for a moment, probably trying to figure out if I was a serious buyer or someone bidding emotionally beyond my means. 105, he called. 115, I responded immediately. Brandon gave me a subtle nod of approval. We'd discussed the strategy of bidding confidently in increments large enough to discourage competition while staying well below my maximum budget. The flipper hesitated, then raised his hand again. 125. 140, I said, jumping by 15,000 to signal that I wasn't going to be intimidated by small incremental increases. The room got quiet. 140,000 was approaching the range where flippers started losing money after renovation costs and carrying expenses. The flipper looked at his notes, did some quick mental math, and shook his head. 140,000 going once, called the auctioneer. I held my breath, scanning the room for any last-minute bidders. Going twice. 150,000. The voice came from the back of the room, and when I turned to look, my stomach dropped. Dad was standing near the entrance, his hand raised, looking pale but determined. We have 150,000, the auctioneer announced. Do I hear 160? I stared at my father, trying to process what was happening. Where had he gotten money to bid? The house was being foreclosed precisely because they didn't have money to make payments. Brandon leaned over and whispered urgently, "You don't have to match that. Let me handle this." But I was already raising my hand. 160,000. Dad looked directly at me for the first time since the bidding started. His face was a mixture of desperation and disappointment, like he couldn't believe his own daughter was competing against him for his house. 170, he called, his voice cracking slightly. The auctioneer looked between us with the professional discomfort of someone who'd clearly witnessed family dramas play out in foreclosure auctions before. 170,000. Do I hear 180? I could feel everyone in the room watching this surreal father-daughter bidding war. Part of me wanted to stop, to let Dad have his house back and find some other way to resolve our family's problems. But a larger part of me was furious that he was putting me in this position, that even now he was trying to manipulate the situation instead of taking responsibility for what had led to this moment. 180,000, I said clearly. Dad's shoulders sagged. He looked down at something in his hand, what appeared to be bank documents, and slowly shook his head. 180,000, going once, going twice. Sold to bidder number 17. Bidder number 17 was me. The paperwork process took another hour. I signed document after document, transferred the down payment from my bank account, and arranged for the balance to be paid within 24 hours as required by law. Brandon handled most of the details while I sat in a daze, trying to fully comprehend that I now owned my childhood home. Dad waited outside the courthouse, leaning against his car like he'd aged 10 years in the past 2 hours. When I approached him, he looked up with eyes red from strain and exhaustion. "Where did you get the money to bid?" I asked. "Your mother's retirement account. We cashed it out this morning, took the penalties and everything. It wasn't enough." "Dad, you destroyed Mom's retirement to try to buy back a house you lost because you couldn't make the payments?" "We thought if we could get the house back, we could work out a new payment plan with the bank." "The bank already foreclosed. There is no payment plan. There's only the auction, and the highest bidder wins." "I know that now." We stood in awkward silence while other bidders walked past us toward their cars. Some looked curious about our obviously personal drama, but most were already focused on their next potential investment. "What happens now?" Dad asked. "Now I own a house that needs work and you and Mom need to find somewhere else to live." "Riley, please. I know we've made mistakes, but that house is all we have left." "It was all you had left. You gambled it on a mortgage you couldn't afford and lost. We'll pay you rent, whatever you think is fair." "With what money? You just cashed out Mom's retirement account and you're still unemployed." "I'll find work. I'll do whatever it takes." "Dad, you're 67 years old. What kind of work are you going to find that pays enough to cover rent on a 3-bedroom house in the Highlands?" He didn't have an answer for that, because we both knew there wasn't one. The retirement account that would have provided them, with modest security for the next 20 years, was gone, spent in a desperate attempt to undo the consequences of their earlier financial mistakes. "Where's Ashley?" I asked. "She turned herself in yesterday. Her lawyer arranged for her to surrender instead of being arrested at home." "And Mom?" "She's staying with your Aunt Patricia in Phoenix until we figure things out." So the family had completely scattered, everyone dealing with the crisis separately instead of together. It was probably the most honest thing they'd done in months. "I need some time to think about what comes next," I told him. "Don't make any major decisions until we talk again." "Are you going to move into the house?" "I don't know yet." Driving home from the courthouse, I felt emotionally drained but strangely relieved. The uncertainty of the past month was over. I owned the house, Ashley was facing criminal charges, and my parents were finally confronting the reality of their financial situation without being able to blame me for their problems. My phone was buzzing with calls and texts, but I ignored them all until I got back to my apartment. Casey had left 3 voicemails asking how the auction went. Dr. Williams had texted asking if I was still interested in the practice partnership. Even Aunt Patricia had called, presumably after hearing from Mom about the auction results. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on my couch, looking around at my small apartment that suddenly felt temporary. In 24 hours, I would officially own a house worth at least twice what I'd paid for it. In theory, I could sell it immediately and use the profit to invest in Dr. Williams's practice expansion, giving me both financial security and professional opportunity. But first, I needed to see the house again. Not as the daughter visiting, her childhood home, but as the owner deciding what to do with a property that represented both an investment and a symbol of everything that had gone wrong with my family. The next afternoon, I drove to the Highlands with the keys Brandon had given me after we completed the final paperwork. The house looked different knowing it was mine, both smaller and more substantial somehow. I walked through each room slowly, seeing it with adult eyes for the first time. The kitchen that Mom had insisted on renovating with borrowed money was beautiful but impractical, all style and not enough storage. The living room where we'd had family meetings and arguments had good natural light but needed new flooring. Dad's home office was cramped and outdated, full of old tax documents and financial records that told the story of their gradual slide into debt. In my old bedroom, I found things they'd never bothered to pack away or donate. High school trophies, college textbooks, photos from veterinary school graduation. It was like a museum of the daughter they'd been too busy or distracted to pay attention to while I was actually living there. Ashley's room was different, clean and updated, obviously used as a guest room for her frequent visits home. Her childhood photos had been replaced with more recent pictures of family vacations and celebrations I hadn't been invited to or couldn't afford to attend. Standing in that room, I realized something important. This house had never really been my home the way it had been Ashley's. I'd lived here, but I'd always been the outsider, the one who didn't quite fit the family dynamic they'd constructed around their golden child. Buying it at foreclosure wasn't about reclaiming my childhood or getting revenge on my parents. It was about taking control of a situation where I'd been powerless, about making a strategic decision instead of an emotional one. My phone rang while I was standing in the master bedroom, looking out at the backyard where Mom's vegetable garden had been abandoned and overgrown. "Riley, it's Dr. Williams. I wanted to follow up on our partnership discussion. Actually, I was going to call you today. I've made a decision." "Oh?" "I'd like to move forward with the partnership. I think building something new makes more sense than trying to fix something that's already broken." "That's wonderful news. We can meet tomorrow to go over the details and timeline." "There's one condition. I'd like to keep working as a veterinary technician while I learn the business side. I want to earn my ownership stake, not just buy it." "I think that's wise. Partnership is about more than money. It's about shared commitment and vision." After hanging up, I walked through the house one more time, making mental notes about necessary repairs and improvements. If I was going to sell it, I wanted to maximize the return on my investment. But I also found myself thinking about what it would be like to renovate it the way I would want to live, not the way Mom had decorated it to impress her bridge club friends. Casey arrived an hour later with Chinese takeout and champagne, ready to either celebrate or commiserate, depending on how I was feeling about owning my family's former home. "So how does it feel to be a property owner?" she asked, setting containers of lo mein and sweet and sour chicken on the kitchen counter. "Weird, expensive, complicated." "Are you going to live here?" "I'm thinking about it. The mortgage payment would actually be less than my rent, and I could use the extra bedrooms as office space for the practice." "What about your parents? What about them? Are you really going to let them be homeless?" I'd been avoiding thinking about that question directly, but Casey's bluntness forced me to confront it. "They're not going to be homeless. Dad has Social Security, and they can probably qualify for senior housing assistance. They'll have to downsize and live more modestly, but that's what happens when you make poor financial decisions." That's pretty cold, even for someone whose family stole their inheritance. "Casey, they cashed out Mom's entire retirement account to try to buy back a house they lost to foreclosure because they couldn't make the payments. Even if they'd won the auction, they still wouldn't have been able to afford the monthly mortgage. They would have been right back in the same situation within 6 months." "So you saved them from themselves?" "I saved myself from them. There's a difference." We ate in silence for a while, sitting at the kitchen table where I'd done homework, and eaten family dinners, and listened to countless conversations about Ashley's latest drama or achievement. The house felt quiet in a way it never had when I was growing up, when it was always full of tension and competing demands for attention. "Have you talked to Ashley since the auction?" Casey asked. "No. She's probably too busy dealing with criminal charges to worry about real estate." "Do you feel bad about that?" "I feel bad that it came to this. I don't feel bad about reporting a crime or refusing to be stolen from. What if she goes to prison?" "Then she'll go to prison. That's what happens when you commit felonies." Casey studied my face like she was trying to figure out if this was really me or some harder version of myself that had emerged from the wreckage of my family relationships. "You've changed," she said finally. "I've stopped accepting unacceptable behavior. If that's change, then I'm glad I changed. Just don't lose yourself in all this anger." "I'm not angry anymore. I'm free." And sitting in that kitchen, in a house that was now mine to do with as I pleased, I realized that was exactly how I felt. Free from the obligation to fix other people's problems. Free from the guilt of standing up for myself. Free from the family dynamics that had kept me small and quiet, and grateful for scraps of attention. The foreclosure auction had been the end of one story and the beginning of another. Tomorrow I would start planning the renovation of both the house and my career. Tonight, I was just going to sit in my new home and enjoy the silence. 6 months later, I was standing in the renovated kitchen of what had once been my parents' house, now unrecognizably transformed into something that actually felt like home. The impractical designer cabinets had been replaced with functional storage, the granite countertops swapped for warm butcher block, and the formal dining room converted into a comfortable office where I managed the business side of my partnership with Dr. Williams. The veterinary practice expansion had exceeded all our projections. Turns out there was significant demand for a clinic that prioritized patient care over profit margins, and my background in finance proved invaluable in managing the growth sustainably. I'd officially become a partner 3 months earlier, and we were already discussing opening a second location. My phone buzzed with a text from Brandon Kim, who'd become not just my real estate agent but a genuine friend. Saw the comp sales in your neighborhood. Your house has appreciated another 15% since the auction. Good investment decision. It had been a good investment, but more importantly, it had been the right personal decision. Living in a space I'd created for myself rather than inherited or accepted had changed how I thought about everything from career goals to relationships. I was no longer the person who made herself small to avoid conflict or accepted less than she deserved, to keep others comfortable. The doorbell interrupted my morning coffee routine. Through the front window, I could see a familiar figure standing on the porch I'd had refinished last month. Ashley looked different than she had at the courthouse 6 months ago. Thinner, more tired, but also somehow more substantial. Prison time, even the relatively brief sentence she'd served, had apparently taught her things that years of family enabling never could. "Hi, Riley. I hope it's okay that I came by. I got your address from Dad." "How did Dad get my address?" "He drives by sometimes. I think he's been keeping track of the renovations you've been doing. I considered not inviting her in, but curiosity won out over caution." She followed me to the kitchen, looking around with obvious amazement at how different everything looked. "This place is incredible. You've completely transformed it." "That was the idea. Dad said you started your own business." "I partnered with the veterinarian I was working for. We've expanded into a full-service animal hospital." Ashley nodded, her hands folded carefully in her lap like she was afraid to touch anything. "I wanted to come here to apologize. A real apology, not the half-hearted excuses I gave you before." "Okay. I stole from you. I forged your signature and cashed a check that belonged to you, knowing exactly what I was doing. I told myself it was temporary, that I'd pay you back before you noticed. But the truth is, I didn't care about your feelings or your financial situation. I only cared about solving my immediate problems." It was the first time she'd taken full responsibility without qualification or excuse. "Thank you for saying that. I also wanted you to know that I've been paying restitution. It's only $100 a month because that's all the court thinks I can afford on my current salary, but I'm actually paying $200. I want to pay you back as fast as possible." "What kind of work are you doing?" "I'm a bookkeeper for a small accounting firm. It's not glamorous, but it's steady and honest work. I'm also taking classes at night to get certified as a paralegal." "That sounds like a good plan." Prison gives you a lot of time to think about the choices that got you there. I realized I'd never actually supported myself as an adult. I'd gone from college to marriage to depending on family to bail me out whenever I made poor decisions. I needed to learn how to be responsible for my own life. We sat in silence for a moment. Outside, I could hear the neighbor's dog barking and the sound of children playing in the street. Normal suburban sounds that I'd grown to appreciate in a way I never had as a child. "How are Mom and Dad?" I asked. Dad found a job doing bookkeeping for a small construction company. The pay isn't great, but it's something. Mom's working part-time at a gift shop in Phoenix. They're living in a senior apartment complex that's actually pretty nice. Are they managing financially? They're getting by. It's tight, but they're learning to live within their means for the first time in years. Dad says it's actually less stressful than when they were juggling multiple debts and trying to maintain a lifestyle they couldn't afford. And how are they about what happened? Ashley looked out the window at the backyard where I'd planted a vegetable garden much more practical than Mom's ornamental flower beds. They're angry about the house. They blame you for being vindictive instead of blaming themselves for creating the situation. But I think they're starting to understand that their financial problems weren't your responsibility to solve. It took them long enough to figure that out. Riley, can I ask you something? Do you think there's any chance we could have a relationship again someday? I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I miss having a sister. The question caught me off guard. I'd been so focused on moving forward with my new life that I hadn't really considered whether there was room in it for reconciliation with my family. I don't know, I said honestly. Trust isn't something that can be rebuilt quickly, especially when it took years to destroy. I understand. I just wanted you to know that I'm committed to making amends, even if it takes the rest of my life. After Ashley left, I walked through the house, thinking about the conversation. The anger I'd carried for months had faded into something closer to indifference. I didn't hate my family anymore, but I also didn't feel obligated to fix relationships. They had broken through their own choices. Dr. Williams called that afternoon with exciting news about a potential third location for our practice. There's a space available in a new development south of town, perfect for our model, and the developer is offering favorable lease terms for medical practices. That would mean hiring more staff, expanding our services even further. I think we're ready for it. We've proven the concept works, and there's clearly demand. Plus, with your financial background, I trust your judgment about sustainable growth. After hanging up, I realized how much my perspective on risk and opportunity had changed. 6 months ago, I'd been someone who played it safe, who avoided conflict, who accepted whatever circumstances other people created. Now I was someone who made strategic decisions, who took calculated risks, who built the life she wanted instead of settling for the life she was offered. That evening, I was working in my home office when I heard a car door slam in the driveway. Through the window, I could see Dad standing beside his old pickup truck, staring at the house like he was gathering courage to approach. I met him at the front door before he could knock. He looked older but healthier than he had at the auction, like the stress of maintaining an unsustainable financial situation had been replaced by the simpler challenge of living modestly within his means. Riley, I hope you don't mind me stopping. Bye. What can I do for you, Dad? I wanted to see what you'd done with the place. Ashley said it was completely different. I considered not inviting him in, but decided there was no harm in letting him see how the house had turned out. He walked through each room slowly, taking in the changes with a mixture of amazement and something that might have been regret. You've made it into something special, he said when we returned to the living room. It feels like a real home now. It is a real home. My home. I owe you an apology. Several apologies, actually. Okay. I'm sorry we let Ashley cash your inheritance check. I'm sorry we called it a misunderstanding instead of taking responsibility for what really happened. And I'm sorry I tried to bid against you at the auction instead of accepting that we'd lost the house through our own poor decisions. Thank you for saying that. I'm also proud of you. What you've built here, the business partnership, the way you've handled all of this. You've shown more maturity and wisdom than your mother and I did. I learned from watching your mistakes. He winced but nodded. Fair enough. We certainly gave you plenty of examples of what not to do. Dad, can I ask you something? Did you ever actually see me as an equal member of this family? Or was I always just the backup plan for when Ashley's schemes fell apart? He was quiet for a long time, looking around the living room that no longer contained any trace of the family that had lived here before. I think we always saw you as the responsible one, the one who could take care of herself. Ashley seemed to need more help, more attention, more support. So you gave her more help, more attention, more support, and expected me to be understanding about it. It wasn't fair to you. I can see that now. It wasn't just unfair, Dad. It was harmful. It taught Ashley that other people would always clean up her messes, and it taught me that my needs didn't matter as much as hers. How do we fix that? You don't fix it. You accept that those were the choices you made and that they had consequences. Ashley's in therapy learning to take responsibility for her own life. You and Mom are living within your means for the first time in years. And I'm building a life that doesn't revolve around managing other people's crises. And our relationship? That depends on whether you can accept me as I am now, instead of expecting me to go back to being the daughter who never caused problems. Dad looked around the house one more time, taking in the evidence of everything I'd accomplished without their help or approval. You're not that daughter anymore, are you? No, I'm not, and I'm never going to be again. Then I guess I need to get to know the daughter you've become. After he left, I sat in my home office looking over the financial projections for our third clinic location. The numbers were solid, the market research promising, the risks manageable. We could probably have all 3 locations operational within 18 months if everything went according to plan. My phone buzzed with a text from Casey. Dinner this weekend? I want to hear about the new clinic plans. It struck me that my social calendar had filled up with plans I actually wanted to keep. Conversations about topics that interested me, relationships built on mutual respect rather than family obligation. I'd learned to say no to things that drained my energy and yes to opportunities that excited me. The doorbell rang one more time that evening. I opened it to find a delivery driver with a package I wasn't expecting. Inside was a small potted plant, a succulent in a ceramic pot with a note attached. Thank you for showing me what taking responsibility actually looks like. I hope someday I'll deserve your forgiveness, but I understand if that day never comes. Your sister, Ashley. I placed the plant on the kitchen windowsill next to the herbs I'd been growing for cooking. It seemed like an appropriate spot for something that was low maintenance but required consistent care to thrive. Looking around the house I'd bought at Foreclosure and turned into a home, thinking about the business I was building and the future I was creating, I realized something important. I'd spent so many years waiting for my family to see my worth, to value my contributions, to treat me as an equal. But their recognition had never been necessary for me to succeed. I just needed to stop waiting for their permission to live my own life. The inheritance Ashley stole had been meant to give me financial security. Instead, losing it had given me something more valuable: the motivation to stop accepting less than I deserved and start building the life I actually wanted. Sometimes the best gifts come disguised as disasters, and sometimes the greatest victory is simply refusing to remain a victim. Tomorrow, I would meet with Dr. Williams to finalize plans for our expansion. I would review contractor estimates for renovating the new clinic space. I would make decisions about my business, my home, and my future based on what was best for me, not what would keep other people comfortable. It had taken 27 years and a stolen inheritance, but I'd finally learned the most important lesson of all. You can't control other people's choices, but you can always control your own response to them. And sometimes the best response is to walk away and build something better. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.